Hello, listeners. This is Kat, and welcome back to Put Your Hands Up Podfics. This will be the continuation of Always Chasing After Something. This will be part 22, the second half to chapter 12. Why was Kamino so far away? Even with all of Izuku's less than legal travel hacks, it still took him 2 hours to reach the city. Having a warp villain on the enemy side was decidedly unfair. Every second Izuku had to waste just traveling after them felt wasted when they could pop around to any spot in the country at a moment's notice. How was anybody supposed to keep up with that? By the time Izuku stealthily grabbed his backpack from the roof and made the trip, it was rush hour, and the streets were packed. Normally, he liked to use his quirk to keep himself off any cameras, but there were too many people for that. It would be far more noticeable to have random packs of people suddenly freezing in place than one random person wearing a dark hoodie in summer. He ended up taking the back streets and rooftops to get to the bar. It was longer, and he was conscious of every second ticking past. But he needed every precaution right now. It had been 20 hours since Bakugo and Aizawa were taken. A lot could happen in that amount of time. Too much. But he had to admit, when he found the Golden Dragon, some of his fears felt unfounded. It wasn't a good part of town by any stretch of the imagination, but it wasn't completely abandoned either. A decent crop of people strolled the streets, even as the hour grew later and later. The bar had to be a secondary hideout. All for One wouldn't be somewhere so public. Not when the doctor's experiments could end up screaming. The labs needed more room than these bars and apartments provided. It was possible the insides looked nothing like the outside, but some of the apartments genuinely looked like apartments through the windows. He sat back on his heels on the roof. If this was where Bakugo and Aizawa were taken, then they might be okay. There was no lab here as far as he could see, which most likely meant no All for One or the doctor either. No crazy doctor, no weird experiments. Unless they'd been taken to another location after warping here. Izuku couldn't rule that possibility out, but for now, it looked like he could relax a little bit. No lab also meant a lower risk of running into Nomu. That fact soothed Izuku immensely and gave him more confidence to figure out a way inside. He used his quirk to approach the bar, half to make sure no one on the street could remember him, and half to make sure any surveillance the League had set up would miss him. At Giron's office, he'd been calm and level-headed, focused on the task at hand. That focus remained, but something like excitement thrummed under his skin. It had been a while since he executed a raid like this, even longer since he went into one with so little information. He had to be ready for anything. He took a moment outside the bar door to activate his quirk in 20-meter radius around him, one of the longer ranges he could maintain comfortably for about half an hour. Maybe a little less, given the lack of sleep and how often he'd been using his quirk for the last 2 days. He was probably getting close to his limit, so he'd need to be careful. The door was unlocked and swung open easily at his prompting. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered, stepping through the doorway to find the League gathered right in front of him. "You idiots didn't even lock the door? What kind of amateurs were they?" Shigaraki sat at the bar, Kurogiri polishing the counter on the other side. Interestingly, while the man himself was frozen, the black wisps around his body still flickered through the air. His quirk must be one of the exceptions to Izuku's, then. It made sense when he thought about it. Warp gates were a finicky thing, both existing in time and space and not existing at the same time. Inconvenient, though. At least the man was frozen and couldn't activate his quirk regardless. Of the rest of the villains gathered in the room, Izuku didn't recognize many. Big Sis Magne had been on the news a bit, so he knew of her, and he'd run into Dabi years ago. He'd met twice before, too, not long after his psychotic break. The man had been looking for information on cloning quirks and how to tell if he was the original one. And even after Izuku assured him that he'd be dead if he wasn't the original, the man hadn't believed him and wandered away without paying him. The man in the top hat and trench coat was unfamiliar, as was the mutant type and the schoolgirl, relatively new villains then, or subtle enough to have not made the news yet. And then there was Bakugo, chained to a chair with heavy cement blocks encasing his hands. He didn't look any worse for wear, at least. Tired, maybe, but that was inconsequential. Good. If he'd been hurt, Izuku would have murdered everyone in this room before he left. He was still considering it, but other than Shigaraki and Kurogiri, he didn't have personal quarrels with anyone else. It didn't feel right to condone them for joining the League when he wasn't exactly an angel himself. Kirishima's face flashed through his mind. He shoved it aside. There was no sign of Aizawa, which worried him. He'd hoped they were being held together. Bakugo might know where he'd gone, so that remained his top priority. He walked over to the blonde and slashed through the leather straps. The cement gauntlets took a little more time, but he pried those off too and dropped them on the floor with a heavy thud. One hand on Bakugo's shoulder, Izuku snapped twice in quick succession, deactivating his quirk and reactivating it just as quickly. None of the villains had any chance to notice his presence, but Bakugo was no longer frozen. "Get your hand! What the hell?" Bakugo raged, jumping from his seat and flexing his fingers. He looked from Izuku to the villains to the chains on the floor. "What the fuck?" "Do you know where they have Aizawa?" Izuku asked. "Izuku?" Bakugo asked, blinking rapidly. Izuku sighed. It had been too much to hope the other wouldn't recognize him in this gear, but between his eyes, voice, and his quirk, it was pretty obvious. "Yes, where's Aizawa?" "That mist fucker warped him to that sensei guy they keep talking to. They sent Ragdoll there, too." The news about Ragdoll sent Izuku for a loop. He hadn't known she'd been taken last night, too. In hindsight, it was obvious. She'd never showed up to help the other pussycats with the aftermath. His attention had been all focused on Bakugo and Aizawa, though. It hadn't left any room for anything else. "You don't have any idea where that is." "I spent half the day as a fucking marble. I haven't learned shit," Bakugo complained. Izuku would come back to the marble question later. He had more important things to worry about. Aizawa had been sent to All For One, which meant his quirk had been stolen and he was dead already, or he'd been passed on to the doctor and probably wished he was dead. How was he going to find him, though? Unfreezing the League and interrogating them would be tricky. There were too many people. He had to pick the one most likely to know and unfreeze them by themselves, the way he had Bakugo. And, unfortunately, the only two people who would know were Kurogiri and Shigaraki. Between those two, Izuku thought Shigaraki would be the easier one to break. Kurogiri would be too troublesome, with his warp gates. "Come here," Izuku said, stomping over to his third most hated person in the world. Well, maybe fourth. Chisaki might have taken the third spot, right behind the doctor and All For One. He'd reorganize the list later. "Why?" Bakugo demanded. Izuku stepped back, grabbed Bakugo's wrist, and dragged him over. "I need to unfreeze him by himself. I need to be touching him to do that." Understanding dawned in Bakugo's face, and he stopped struggling while Izuku got in position. Izuku set his foot against Shigaraki's leg. This was enough contact for his quirk, which, thankfully, left his hand free to snap his fingers. Then he gleefully kicked Shigaraki off his bar stool. The villain crashed to the floor with a sneer. "Who do you think you are? How'd you get in here?" "You dumbasses left the door unlocked," Izuku stated. He dropped Bakugo's hand and pulled out a knife. "Now, you're going to tell me where you sent Aizawa, or I'm going to start cutting fingers off." "Wait, 84? Is that you?" Izuku kicked him again. "You call me Ghost or nothing at all, got that?" What the fuck? Bakugo whispered behind him. Shigaraki growled and got his feet under him, climbing up to his full height, as if that was intimidating. Izuku had always been short, and he'd fought bigger people most of his life. The intimidation factor was lost on him. You're going to learn your place. Kurogiri, send the brat to Sensei. Kurogiri is unavailable at the moment, Izuku informed. He hefted his knife, mostly for show. You want to pick which finger to lose, or should I? Shigaraki glanced around at his immobile team. What did you do to them? Stop worrying about them and start worrying about yourself, Izuku warned. He pushed the tip of the knife at Shigaraki. Past him was having a mental breakdown at his audacity. Behavior like this would have earned him a liquid diet for a month and bodily changes from the doctor. Izuku kept past him locked in a box and buried in the back of his mind. Shigaraki wrapped his hand around Izuku's wrist, fifth finger pressing down on his sleeve. Before Izuku could slash out with a second knife, Bakugo's hand reached past his face and hurled an explosion at Shigaraki. The hand released Izuku. His wrist was fine. The only damage were a few holes in his sleeve. There hadn't been time for Shigaraki's quirk to do more than that. Keep your hands off him, Bakugo warned, and tell us where you sent Aizawa and Ragdoll. I'd be happy to have Kurogiri send you right to them, Shigaraki said. He brushed ash off his shoulder. Behind him, Bakugo choked. Izuku whipped around. Bakugo doubled over, sludge pouring out of his mouth. A second later, Izuku was in the same position. What the hell was this? No one in this room should be able to do this to them. This wasn't Shigaraki's quirk, and everyone else was frozen. His quirk was still active, so how in the world was this happening? Shigaraki cackled. Looks like Sensei got impatient. The sludge pooled around their feet, and they melted into it. Darkness covered Izuku's vision, and for a solid 3 seconds he couldn't breathe. When it cleared, he was on his hands and knees in an entirely different room, Bakugo coughing only a few feet away from him. I had no idea that bar was haunted, a deep, velvety voice said. It froze Izuku down to his bones. He fucked up. His panic attack from the Nomu had been nothing compared to the panic coursing through him now. Those black eyes burned in his memory, always analytical, examining him like he was just a piece of fruit at the store while casually giving the doctor suggestions that would cause him more pain. The little satisfied grin on his face as he ripped modified quirks out of Izuku's body and put unmodified quirks in. The true puppeteer of Izuku's kidnapping and torture. Oh, God. He fucked up. Who the fuck are you? Bakugo demanded, getting to his feet. Izuku didn't even consider standing up. He wasn't sure he'd be able to uncurl from his hunched-over position on the floor. All For One wasn't supposed to know Izuku had been there. He wasn't supposed to know Izuku was alive. He'd take the quirk back, and as much as Izuku hated how he got it and struggled to accept it, he wasn't willing to part with it now. You can simply call me All For One, for now, he said. It's lovely to meet you, Katsuki Bakugo. And Ghost. Was he breathing? Was that a thing he knew how to do? The fuck is wrong with you? Get up, Bakugo hissed. Get up. Izuku wanted to laugh or cry, maybe both at the same time. Maybe he'd never start breathing and he could just die now and get it over with. It seems someone knows of my reputation, though we've never had the pleasure of meeting before now. In the back of Izuku's mind, some emergency protocol rebooted. Never had the pleasure of meeting before. How could All For One not remember him? He'd been the favored experiment because his quirklessness made him more adaptable to new quirks. No, it wasn't that he didn't remember him. With his gear on, All For One didn't recognize him. He had no idea who Ghost really was. Maybe Izuku wasn't as screwed as he thought he was, but that was only if he could get himself and Bakugo out of this, which he needed to be on his feet to do. It was not as easy to convince his panic attack that now was not the time. He trembled so badly his legs wouldn't support him, and rather than make a fool of himself trying to stand, Izuku settled for a battle-ready crouch. Semi-battle-ready. If an actual fight broke out right now, he'd be screwed, because none of his limbs would cooperate with him. God, he hadn't even looked up at the man yet. All he'd seen of their new surroundings was the dirty cement floor. "I don't care what your reputation is," Bakugo said. "I'll blow you to pieces." Welp, it was nice knowing Bakugo. He was as good as dead now. All for One laughed. "Such spirit. I miss that about my childhood." He wasn't taking them seriously. How could he when Izuku couldn't get himself off the floor and Bakugo acted like a small dog yapping at all the bigger dogs? They were no threat to All for One. Bakugo had realized it too and set off a few explosions in his palms. "Don't underestimate us." "I would never," All for One said. "It's not just anyone who can break into a villain lair and steal a captive back without breaking a sweat. I'm intrigued." "How did you even know I was there?" Izuku demanded, voice shaky but stronger than he felt. "I admit I had no idea at first. When the camera feed paused, I assumed there was an issue with the connection. That happens sometimes. But then the frame changed, and suddenly you were there." Shit. Fucking cameras. That was how the Shie Hisaikai knew about him saving Eri too. "Bullshit. You have no eyes," Bakugo said. What? Izuku distinctly remembered this man having eyes. It was enough of a surprise that he finally looked up at the man sitting 20 feet away from them, lounging back in a cushy leather armchair. Half a dozen medical machines hung off of him, an oxygen mask over his mouth, and tubes trailing from his arms and back. The top of his head was nothing but scar tissue. His eyes truly were gone, thick skin covering the empty sockets. The villain barely looked like a shell of his former self. Could he even stand up? Was he confined to that chair? Was this what All Might had done to him 6 years ago? He'd definitely weakened the man, that was for sure. The entire setup was curated for long-term use. If it came down to a fight, he and Bakugo might actually stand a chance against him. "Not with my eyes, no. It took me quite a while to track down someone with the right quirk, but I assure you, young man, I can see just fine." "Whoop-de-freaking-do," Bakugo growled. Izuku snorted. It was a surreal experience seeing anyone talk back to All for One that way, like they truly didn't give a damn if he could crush them with a thought. Bakugo, of course, had no idea that he could, but Izuku wasn't entirely sure that knowledge would have stopped him. "What do you want with us?" Bakugo demanded. "An excellent question," All for One said. "Your quirk would be wonderful for a Nomu, but Tomura has his heart set on you joining his little playmates." "Like hell," Bakugo spat. "As for Ghost," his head turned in Izuku's direction. "Oh, there are many things I'd like with you, Ghost. You've perfected that quirk since you ran off. Pity you cut off the wings. But we never could get you airborne, could we?" Whatever sanity Izuku had managed to regain splintered into pieces. He'd been wrong. All for One did remember him. He remembered him. Izuku was so screwed. He was going to be used as an experiment again, and this time he wouldn't survive. Bakugo glanced between him and All for One, the puzzle clicking into place. "You're the fucker who kidnapped him, aren't you?" "Don't be ridiculous," All for One said. "Dr. Garaki scouted him all on his own and arranged the entire thing. I merely provided financial support." Bakugo growled, larger explosions popping in his hand. "Then I'll go after him next. Now die!" He blasted himself forward. Bakugo, don't! Izuku yelled. He still couldn't get his feet under him. The ongoing panic attack had left him lightheaded, and his heart was threatening to beat hard enough to break his ribs. Air cannon, All For One said, lifting his palm out to Bakugo. A tornado blew Bakugo back, extinguishing his explosions. Izuku covered his eyes from the dirt flying into his face. Not a weak and defenseless villain. Definitely not a weak and defenseless villain. He'd been wrong about that too. He and Bakugo were screwed. Bakugo tumbled, head over heels, rolled onto his feet, and slid to a stop. You going to help or not? Bakugo demanded, blasting forward again. All For One sighed and used air cannon as casually as swatting away a fly. Use your damn quirk, Izuku! Bakugo screeched. Izuku jolted. Right. His quirk. His quirk that would literally stop All For One in his tracks and give them the perfect opportunity to flee. All For One pressed a button on his armrest. Kurogiri, send some of your new recruits here. He was not a helpless child anymore. He was not helpless. He sucked in a breath and snapped his fingers. Range extended to 50 meters. Bakugo stopped in midair, face twisted into something feral. All For One sat, with one hand propping up his head, perfectly casual and nonplussed. A warp gate opened between them. Fuck my life, Izuku mumbled, watching as every member of the League of Villains stepped through. The room really wasn't big enough to accommodate this many people. The villains spread out around them, surrounding them and blocking the door. Izuku snapped, deactivating his quirk. It was better to have Bakugo free to act on his own right now. Warning explosions popped in Bakugo's hands, and he stood in front of Izuku. He wouldn't have seen the League coming in, but he was adapting marvelously. We don't have to do this violently, you know, All For One said. Screw you, Izuku bit back. He grabbed the back of Bakugo's shirt and snapped again. Half the League lunged for him at the same time and now stood frozen mid-leap, their quirks in various states of activation. Great, now what? Bakugo said. Now we get out of here, Izuku said. Aizawa and Ragdoll should be here somewhere. If All For One needed that much medical equipment, he wouldn't have let his doctor go very far. Wherever they were, this had to be where the hidden lab was. And if Izuku wanted to save Aizawa, he was going to have to willingly find it and walk back into it. All right, listeners, this concludes the second half to Chapter 12 of Always Chasing After Something. Chapter 13 will be up next. I would love to hear your thoughts, reactions to this chapter and the fic so far, so drop your comments below for me. Let me know what you're thinking. And as always, thank you all so much for listening.